Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. There are some wonderful guests and some wonderful projects to learn about. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to this very special final episode of Season 2 of Explore, Explain. In today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome two guests, Stephanie Posavec and Miriam Quick. It's great to see you both again. I hope you're all doing very well. Just to begin with, can you do a brief introduction for the listeners and viewers, please? Start with you, Steph.
Sure. I'm Stephanie Posavec. I'm an information designer and artist and author who mainly works on experimental data and data visualization projects. Some of you might have heard of the project that I did with Georgia Lupi, Dear Data, which became a book of the same name, and then also a journal called Observe, Collect, Draw. I can't remember the names of my own books. And then right now I'm working as an artist in residence for People Like You, a research project looking at data personalization. So I'm looking at biobanks. I'm drawing biobanks at the moment.
Wow, fantastic. And to you, Miriam, as well?
I'm Miriam Quick. I'm a data journalist and researcher. So I write data stories. I work on database pieces for clients with creative agencies, and I also co-create artworks that represent data. And I'm really interested in novel ways of communicating data. So that might be through sculpture or through sound. And I'm particularly interested in projects that involve combining data and music. So I studied music before I came into data visualization. So one of the projects that you might have heard of is called Oddityverse, which was a collaboration with Valentina De Filippo, in which we visualized David Bowie's song Space Oddity on a series of 10 engraved records. And we have these accompanying posters and animation. So really kind of layering all the different aspects of the song and putting each one on a record. And at the moment, I'm working on a project with Duncan Gear called Loud Numbers, which is a data sonification podcast. It's forthcoming. We're hoping to release it at the beginning of next year.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to welcome you both to the episode. And today's episode is a little bit of a departure from the normal topics that we cover in these discussions about visualization projects. This is a book, and it's a book called I Am a Book. I Am a Portal to the Universe. And just to begin with, and I know it's quite a difficult task in this case, but I'll come to you for this, Steph. Can you just give people listening and watching a quick sort of 20, 30-second premise of what this book's about, what it looks like, and how you don't just read it?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Elevator pitch. So I Am a Book. I Am a Portal to the Universe. It uses itself as a measuring device to size up the wonders of the cosmos on a one-to-one scale, where every interaction with a book or the book's components is actually communicating data. So it uses its volume, its weight, the thickness of a page, how loud how loud of a noise it makes when it slams shut, wearing it as a hat. What else does it do? Holding one side of the book up and letting it drop. So both every aspect of its materials, and then also how all these different ways that you interact with it tell you something. They kind of each communicate an interesting kind of data fact about our universe.
That's right. It's a completely unique book. I've never seen or encountered anything like it. And I mean, first of all, I love it. That's the first thing to share with listeners and viewers. And I think my first question therefore is, how did this even come about? Obviously, this is a collaboration between the two of you. So it's not even that there's just sort of one person's just followed this pathway. What was the very first moment, the very first seed of an idea or of a conversation that you had that said, shall we do this? I'll come to you, Miriam, for this one.
So I think it was 2018, losing count of the years now. This year's been such a weird year. I think it was 2018 in the summer. We basically, I think, Steph, you got in touch with me and said, I think I have beginnings of an idea. I'm not sure if there's anything to it, but met up for
okay. I just need to interject and say I don't even think there was anything. It was more of like we need to come up with something new. There was like nothing.
Okay, an appeal, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we met up with this cafe in Brixton, and we started talking about the kind of things that we're excited about. And I think we were talking about things like indexable data visualization, where the visualization is itself a kind of expression of the data in a very direct way, like tree rings express how long tree has been alive. And we started talking about books, and obviously Stephanie has a really good book design background, and we thought, well, can we combine these ideas and create a book where the book itself communicates data, where the book itself is like a measuring device. So that was really where the idea came from.
Now, would that be because you felt there was, I mean, this is quite a, kind of a commercial perspective, but was that because you felt there was a gap in the market for this kind of text? Or just simply because this sounds a real fun thing to do? I'll come to you for this, Steph.
I think, I feel like Miriam and I have had conversations, and I don't think I don't think sales are in the forefront of our minds when we come up with these ideas. I think it is really just like, the goal is let's do something that's never been done before, and this sounds quite fun. I think that was probably the first idea. But I mean, also, I think we've talked about this before, and I can let Miriam pick it up, but just we kind of have chart fatigue, and info books as we know them like exploded about a decade ago and have had a massive influence on our field. But has the book moved forward with how it communicates data? And so we thought, well, we really just want to try something different because we just felt like that space hadn't really evolved. And so this is our opportunity to do that. Yeah,
and I think you're right. I think, as somebody who's written a couple of books down the years, I think there's still, the discourse, the telling others how to do it is still the dominant part of the market. And I guess that's still reflective of where there's still a great deal of demand from readers to have that knowledge explained to them. But I think there's an even greater appetite these days for different things. And, going back to your work on Dear Data, Steph, the seismic impact I think that had on the field in doing two things. I think first of all, it opened this subject area up to just a whole huge swathe of people who previously felt perhaps felt it was inaccessible, maybe through technical reasons or just through conceptual reasons that they just didn't find a way to chime with the bar chart sort of discourse. But also you made it accessible in terms of the tools and the techniques you were espousing, which was pen and paper. It was artisanal stuff. And I think that meant over the last 5 years or so, we've seen this huge direction change, I think, in the sensibility of a lot of our visualization work. We still need the geometric bar charts, precision materials, but I think now there's been this sort of wider spectrum of ways of expressing data, and I think that's a huge sort of testament to what you and Georgia achieved with that work. But I guess this goes to that next level. So Miriam, you're in this cafe, you've had this conversation, and kind of where does it go next? I mean, what's the journey from that cafe moment to the point where you walk away, you're thinking, yeah, maybe there's something in this, to actually going to a publisher and saying, right, bear with us, we've got this idea. So what kind of happened between those 2 points?
Well, the first thing we did was we got in touch with an agent that Stephanie had worked with before, Rebecca Carter at Janklow and Nesbitt, who, we first had to really kind of formulate what is this idea, is there anything to this, and put things down in writing. So we wrote this document where we were like laying out the basic framework, sent it over to Rebecca, and she loved the idea, fortunately. And we arranged a meeting, and she said, well, look, you need to put together a proposal, and this is what you need to put in it. And we'll need some sample spreads. So we need to really test this idea to see if it's got legs. So initially we worked on, I think it was 6 sample spreads for the proposal. And that was the point where kind of shit got real. Like we had to sort of make this thing work, as well as just describing what it would be, actually test it. And I think that was the point where we realized that we had something that was going to work.
And I guess from your point of view, although I'm sure there were pain points through that process of articulating to them and getting them to agree that this is a thing. Did that help you to sort of sharpen your sense of actually what this was going to be, and also guess what it was not going to try and be at the same time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, laying things out in writing and being disciplined about it always does that. I think there was a sense quite early on, and I can't remember if we actually had it in the proposal, but that the book itself would be a character. The book would speak in the first person. It would have this very distinct voice, and that it would introduce its own dimensions first, and then it would introduce what it can show you about the world using its own dimensions and measurements. So that was quite fundamental, I think. And also that everything would be on a one-to-one scale. This was something that got set very early, that we didn't want to use, essentially, we didn't want to translate between scales. We wanted to have everything on the page at actual size, or, you know, the volume of the book is the volume of the thing that we're talking about, or the weight of the book is the weight of the thing that we're talking about, so that you can experience it in a very physical, very direct way without having to do any kind of mental abstraction.
And we'll come on to some of those kind of physical material aspects in a second, but just to sort of close off this discussion about the kind of publishers and the agents you worked with. First of all, did you work with anybody else in terms of the book's creation, or was it purely just the two of you? I'll come to you, Steph, for this. Is it just the two of you who worked on this book, or did any other people contribute?
Well, I mean, really, it was just the two of us, although I guess we have a lot of people that helped us in the thank yous. So you know, we have a lot of acknowledgements, but I think that the people who were shaping the direction of the book, it was me and Miriam, and then our agent was Rebecca, was a really excellent sounding board, and then we had a couple different editors who were really part of the process, who offered a lot of input as well. But it was really just the two of us. And I'm sure Miriam wants to thank all the people that helped from the fact-checking side of things.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, well, one person I should thank first is Helen Conford, who was our first editor, who was at Penguin at the time, and now is at Profile Books. And she was the one who really, you know, the editor who first believed in the concept and said, look, this is something that you need to go away and do. But then there were a lot of people who helped me with the fact checking and reading through the book, looking for any kind of lapses in tonal errors or omissions. And I'm kind of lucky that I have a lot of friends and family who work in science. So I've got quite a good army of fact checkers there. And there were people who helped with specific spreads. Like, I'm really grateful to Charlie Stone, Duncan Gear, and Jonas Helson, who helped with this particular spread, which is about what would happen if you dropped the book from a 10-kilometer high tower. Like, physically speaking, what would happen? It's quite difficult to model, so I needed to enlist some physicists to actually work out the impact of air drag and whether the book would rotate and what speed it would hit the ground at. So I'm really grateful to them for that.
So, I mean, yeah, I get the idea that there's so many different facts and figures and things that are so intrinsically crucial to be right that if they are not, the whole premise sort of frays at the edges. So yeah, I can see why you'd need that cast and crew of people. We've got a little bit of a distance as well from the project to be able to have that sort of say, right, kind of like the clarity of checking. Now, I'll come to you for this, Steph. The question that we always ask or always have to think about is design for the audience and who is the audience, and how would you describe the intended audience that you have in mind for this? Because it feels like it could be extremely broad, which in itself isn't a bad thing. It could be kids, it could be data people, it could be science curious people, but you must have had some person or persona in mind as you were working on it.
Yeah, what we usually say is it's for everyone age 8 and up. But I think from the beginning, we saw it as an all ages book, but maybe it's one that can be a grown-up can share with a younger person, like with a child, and you know, they can sort of explore it together.
Yeah.
So it was published under a adult imprint that will often publish these books that sort of fall across these spaces. So kind of, yeah, hard to define books like ours.
It is, but I think that, and I get caught up in this as well, because I'm always preaching to others, define your audience. But sometimes I think actually you could almost just treat it like the Batman light beam into the sky and just see who connects with it and see who finds it. But I also like the idea that there's something, I mean, we've talked, or we will talk about even further about the interactiveness of it. I also like the idea that it can be experienced by more than one person simultaneously. And that idea of a parent and child's experience, I think can be quite powerful. In fact, sometimes I think you need two people to fully experience every single content. And so kind of on that note, then the printed materials, the book itself. So I'm just looking at my notes here. We've got 112 pages. It's 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters square. The page thickness is 0.18 millimeters. And then we've got these lovely sort of thick cover cardboard front and back covers. There's obviously deliberation there in the materials, the shape, size, and the weighting. How did you end up with those particular specifications? So why 112 pages? Why 20 by 20? What kind of led you to that particular dimension, or indeed that constraint?
Oh, well, firstly, I'll speak about the square dimensions of the book, because that was something I thought was quite fundamental. Like, we really like the idea of the book as this very coherent unit that's very easy to gauge the size of. So we want it to be as square as possible. So the pages are 20 by 20 centimeters squared. The page thickness was just the standard paper stock. Like, we had no real control over that. So I think I calculated it from the GSM of the paper, and also just measured it with a ruler. The number of pages, I believe that's one for you, Steph, is to do with the book binding.
Yeah, so, well, there's a lot of things that we actually don't really have that much control over. And a lot of the decisions, well, like when it comes to cover decisions and the finishes that you can get on the cover, a lot of it will be dependent on what production will let you do and how much money you can burn. So, but yeah, the reason why it's 112 pages is just that a book is created from signatures. So, the big sheets of paper that multiple pages are printed on and then folded down, and then it becomes a little booklet. So so that's a signature. And so our book is made of 5 signatures.
Right.
Which somehow, or I think it's 5. I don't know. However they do it, it breaks it down to 112. So you can either have that many, or you'd have to add another 16 or 12 pages. So,
right. Okay.
So that's a decision on, yeah, they sort of tell you what it is, and then you just have to fill it.
Because just very quickly, Mary, I'll come back to you in a second. It feels very much therefore that it feels a bit sort of chicken and egg, because if you're writing to the dimensions, you need to know those up front, but you also need to know the dimensions to know how to write to it. So there's obviously a kind of collision of 2 different pressure points there. But yeah, back to you, Miriam.
Oh yeah, just to speak to that, like there were a lot of constraints with this book, and one of the things that really helped us was that we had a dummy made. We had a pair of dummies made, so we had one each. So early in the process, that we just had this blank book that we could kind of touch and hold, and it was done to the final specs, final coverboard thickness, paper specs, paper size, and we literally just weighed that dummy to see how much the book would weigh, and it came out roughly about 450 grams. We were like, well, that's lucky, it's a nice round number. It's nearly £1 if in case we get a US deal. So that was great. And then we became kind of obsessed over the course of writing the book with like making sure this weight was accurate. So we had lots and lots of different dummies made, and then when we got our first copies back from the printers, we weighed it again, and we made our editor weigh it and our agent, and kind of took the mean, and we were like, oh, is it really going to be? It was a bit underweight. And then we realized that if you keep the book in a room for 6 months, it puts on weight because it absorbs moisture from the air. Right. So my book gained like 10 grams because I live in Devon and it's kind of really damp. So yeah, we probably got a bit too obsessed with the weight, didn't we? But it's roughly 450 grams.
I'll just chime in here just to say that I think it's just the data side of us, where you are so used to trying to be as precise as possible, but you're also working with such a variable material, which is books and paper. And humidity, which is out of your control, you know.
I love that idea that it grows over time. Like it's getting, I don't know, it's like absorbing cleverness over time, or the sort of
Yeah.
cerebral energy that's growing over time. But I suppose, you know, and the physicality of that book is absolutely crucial to the premise itself. But were you ever considering some kind of digital companion or an equivalent through the mobile, for example? Or would this always just be a simply and purely a printed endeavor? Come to you for this, Steph.
Well, I don't think I mean, it was never in my mind. We've never ever talked about this. And then also, so I guess the answer is no there. But then I also think that it would, I think it was always really meant to be physical, to the point where they were sort of had bandied about the idea of making this an ebook for some reason. And we were just like, no, it absolutely cannot be an ebook. There's no way that it can be an ebook, because I mean, I know that the Dear Data and Observe, Collect, Draw are actually both available as ebooks, and to be honest, people are always really disappointed with them because, you know, I mean, they're beautiful color books and they should be sort of experienced physically, but for this, definitely. So I don't think we ever thought about a digital output, but also I feel like it wouldn't have even been possible purely because of the cost. And I mean, that would be a publisher. I sort of don't think, I mean, it's so hard to get a Pantone ink out of a publisher that I don't think they would pay for the development of an app or something.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it would take away from the experience. And on that note, I'm just looking at again my notes here. So I'm an informative, interactive experience in which the data can be touched, felt, and understood with every measurement represented on a 1:1 scale. Sorry. So I mean, it just feels to me that, you know, when you go through the book, and we'll talk about the sequencing perhaps in a short while, but you do sort of, it feels like you bounce between kind of artistic and playful, and then more sort of literal and informative. And as I said, you are interacting with it. You're touching things. You are lifting things and putting on your head. You're dropping things. And I just wondered what didn't make it in the book. Did you come up with some kind of real wacky kind of interactions that you felt that's going too far, or like throw it at a husband or a wife or something, or just something that you felt actually would be legally frowned upon that couldn't make it? You know, what was not in the book?
Well, there were quite a few things that didn't make it into the book, actually. So we originally started with a list of about 80 different, what we call variables, ways in which the book can tell a story through its measurements. And a lot of them didn't make the cut, but there were some that kind of didn't make the cut for safety reasons. Like we had this idea that maybe we could use the book as not literally, of course, but conceptually use it as a bullet shield. Could a book stop a bullet? And I watched lots of YouTube videos to see how many books it takes to stop a bullet. Turns out it's quite a lot of books, but you don't really want to be experimenting with it. And
that's not a bad sales pitch, though, is it? You know, if you buy 10 copies, you are bulletproof.
Yeah, it'd be lovely to say that, but we thought somebody might actually test it.
Well, but I'd like to interject and just say, as a little side note, I think that, really bring it into a gloomy point, but I think there was like some YouTube person who did do that and met a tragic end.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, okay, we can't do this.
Right. Yeah,
that's
leave
true.
a sour note, I guess. Yeah, absolutely. And with regards so you call them variables, how did you formulate that list? I mean, I'm sure there's a certain degree of brainstorming, but we do cover quite a wide spectrum of topics and facts and figures that feels like it's, you know, it's an achievement in itself to come up with those topics. So what was the process you went through? And I don't know, how much research did you have to do to even like unlock these ideas? Let's come to you for this, Steph.
I guess what I'll do is I'll talk about kind of my way into the problem, which is coming from a design perspective, because Miriam's approach is from a different angle. But I mean, we did start with having a dummy, or just even before we had the dummy of the book, just holding books in our hands and playing with them, you know, looking at every single component of the book, doing as many strange things as we could. And then for me, I would use that as a starting point and be like, oh, Miriam, wouldn't it be a beautiful poetic thing if this interaction represented this? That seems like a really nice link. And then she could go see whether that data was there or not. Like there was one, like a good example is that originally I thought, wouldn't it be cool if this could be like your beak? And like you could show the proportion of a bird's beak to your head, like
Right.
see how big, if you were a bird, how big your beak would feel. But that data is not out there. So then Miriam like had to find tongue data. So that was one side, was just me coming at it from a visual wit perspective, like trying to find just clever, witty ways of communicating the data where the interaction somehow had some very perfect like connection to the data we were communicating. Just, yeah, looking for very playful kind of aha concepts. That was my way into it. And then Miriam, you came from the other side, didn't you?
Yeah, so I was coming more from a research point of view, and I was looking at things that I was personally interested in, that I wanted to find out more about. I might occasionally read something in a book or a magazine or a journal and be like, that's a fantastic figure that really helps contextualize something important about the world, and I want to include that. But a lot of them actually came from sort of almost like reverse engineering from the measurements themselves. So the book weighs 450 grams. What can I think of that's the same weight as 450 grams? Or what would be a meaningful way of communicating weight differences? So we have a spread which is about how much the book would weigh on the moon. It'd weigh as much as a tennis ball, so about 1/6 of the weight. Or how much it would weigh on Jupiter. It would weigh about as much as a bottle of wine. And then how much it would weigh on a neutron star, which is kind of almost infinite, as much as a mountain. And yeah, I was also starting from, things like the size of a page. The page is 20 centimeters wide and tall. So that's our maximum length we can include on a 1-to-1 scale. And the minimum length is really the smallest possible dot that you can see on a page, which I think was 0.1 millimeters. So those are our size constraints. And we've got this spread, which is about kind of exploring those size constraints. So we've got a page of 2 eggs. On the left-hand side, there's the human egg, which is just about visible with the naked eye, and it's about 0.1 millimeters across. And it's a tiny, tiny dot on the end of an arrow. And then we've got another kind of, it's actually a sort of xenophyrophore. It's not an egg, it's a very mysterious kind of sea creature, lives at the bottom of the ocean. And it's about 20 centimeters across, and it's a single cell. So it's one of the biggest single-celled organisms. Right. So you've got the smallest possible point and the largest possible point on the page. So yeah, I think really the book was about starting from our constraints and working out what we could do within those constraints.
And I just feel like I need to chime in and just say, so basically we communicate in Slack. And so then Miriam will go on this like meandering, digging deeper and deeper and deeper roundabout. And then it like all comes together on the Slack of like, and then I thought of the sound of the sun. Just like it goes like looping here and around, then you just, so it's been a really interesting thing to watch from
a profound conclusion. Yeah. And I'd say that on that note of kind of working together, then, so am I right in thinking that this was pretty much completed before lockdown happened as a thing? So yeah, I guess by extension then, it feels like this is something that you could have collaborated on at any time, irrespective of the ability to meet up or otherwise. And so I'm kind of interested how well you've clearly worked together, because in my experience, bringing 2 creative people as you are together can go one of 2 ways. You either sort of butt up against each other to the extent that you kind of nullify each other's creativity, or you are both so creative that then there's just a lack of maybe discipline, lack of organization. So you clearly, you've worked before in the past together. So this is not a new venture for you to work together, but what are your reflections on how well you have deployed your respective skill set to create almost this sort of transcendent third person?
Shall I answer that one?
You go for that, Miriam. So
okay.
I'm sure you're both hesitant to claim how well you worked.
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that we were actually friends before we started working together. So,
And
you
still
know, we
are.
already had, and of
Yeah.
course, we
Yeah.
still
Yes,
are.
good.
So that created a really strong basis for actually working together. But the other thing I think is really important is that we both respect each other's skill sets. So, you know, I respect the fact that Steph is an expert in what she does, and that if she says that something isn't possible design-wise, it's not possible design-wise, and we kind of don't go too far. At the same time, we have this middle space where we collaborate. Like a lot of the text was written jointly, a lot of copies. So I think that there's a kind of sufficient overlap and also sufficient distance in our skill sets that makes it really work.
That be your view as well, Steph?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just second that. And then I think, yeah, there's a lot of trust. I know that Miriam is really good at research and at writing. I know she's just going to do what she needs to do, and she's going to do it well. And so I don't really, don't worry about it and just let her get on with it. And then I just get on with my bit. And I mean, the thing, it is a very different, like, it's probably for me, the most kind of harmonious integrated collaboration, because we each do have this space. I mean, I've definitely not worked like this with anyone else before. And just as a contrast, I mean, the Dear Data project with Georgia Lupi was very, very different, because we were both designers with a very particular creative style, who then had to find a way to like work where we both were able to put forward our creative outlook, but also not, you know, that was definitely, I mean, I think that was more challenging, whereas this felt, yeah, it feels a lot easier if you work with someone who, you know, it's what we do is just so different. So
yeah, and I think the characteristic of Dear Data as well was that you were trying to actually surface that difference, because there was a physical distance from yourself, and you were posting your own perceptions of interpretations about the subjects each week. So in a sense, that difference actually enriched the texture of that project, in my view. Whereas this, you have to find that kind of commonality, because it's a shared output rather than two distinct outputs that come together. One thing I forgot to touch on, when you talk about kind of working together and the efficiency of it all, what kind of timescales were you working to with this book? And I mean, did it help to perhaps have a literary agent who acted as a little bit of a director, as an organizer, as someone who could sort of tell you off if you'd not reached a deadline? Did that kind of materialize as a way of working with them as well?
I think we were good at telling ourselves off, weren't we, Miriam?
Yeah, we set our own deadlines and we met them.
Right. No further questions then. Well, I suppose there is actually, there's a broader question, I guess. I think people are always fascinated by how long these things take. So what was the rough calendar from when you first had that sit down in Brixton Cafe to when it was not necessarily published, but when it was at least your work had finished and you handed it over to the publishers?
So I think it was about 2.5 years, was it, from sort of start to publication? So it was summer of 2018 that we came up with the concept.
March of 2018 that we had the meeting. I definitely
right.
That, I was away for a bit. So I think, 2.5 years from that initial idea to publication. And even after the publication, like we handed it to print, it wasn't finished because we had to do all the promotion. I have some numbers. I checked my time. I wasn't tracking in 2018, and then in 2019 I started to track all of my work time. This is Miriam is something different, but I know that I spent 180 hours in November and December. We had a deadline to hand in the whole thing before Christmas. So that was just November
months.
and December.
Right, wow.
And then in 2020, it's been 300 hours so far. So I had 120 hours doing corrections, text corrections, print checks, like just really preparing the file for print, getting all of the color. I had to really technically refine like the color gradients to make sure they would print and make sure that the files were perfect, basically. And then I think there were 180 hours so far for promotion, websites, social media, talks, podcasts.
Podcasts, yeah.
Yeah.
Going through all the grind. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because, you know, as freelancers, these things are not directly, tangibly, you know, an income revenue at the point in time, and it's a leap of faith. It's an investment in the future. It's a calling card that then hopefully brings in clients in other different routes. So it is a very hard thing to keep that focus, to give up that sheer amount of time, because I guess this isn't the only thing that either of you are working on at any given point in time. There'll be lots of other things that you're juggling. So, you know, I do feel people sometimes don't fully estimate just how much work goes into this as non-book writers, but also those people who set out to write a book. It can be surprising just how much goes into it.
Yeah, a lot went into it, but I would say also that we had an advance, so that really helped. You know,
Yeah.
kind of just as a way of persuading for me myself that this is something that is work and that I need to work on, because
Right.
it was such a fun process. Like, I really, really enjoyed working on the book, that it could have been very easy to convince myself that it wasn't work. Like,
That's
I
right.
actually just would have done it for free. But yeah, I think it was for me, I think about 2 days a week that I spent on the book, roughly speaking, from about April 2019 to December 2019, and then bits around that. And towards the end, it was a lot more as things, you know, became intense before the deadline. But on the whole, we were quite disciplined in reaching our kind of interim deadlines, so it wasn't too bad for me.
And those post sort of first draft publications, the edits, the check-in, the promotion, that's a lot of hard work, and that's sometimes, again, hard to foresee before it happens, but you have to do that. I mean, I hated the editing process of going from sort of second draft to final piece. It's torturous. Now, one of the things I forgot to ask about in the start when you talked about readers, to what degree did you have to think about accessibility issues with this book? Miriam, you spoke before about that, you know, 0.1 of a millimeter size thing. For people who have any visual impairments that might not be able to see that, the colours that you've used, there may not be people who can see all the colours. So to what degree do you have to sort of walk the tightrope of, these are cool concepts to try out, but there may be some people who are prevented from experiencing those? How important did that come into you think? I'll come to you for this, Steph.
Well, I guess I can just answer and say it wasn't a factor. I guess it wasn't a factor, though it could have been a factor. I mean, I guess I'll just be honest about that, right? And so that's not to say that I don't work on projects where, like I'm doing a project for the Wellcome Collection, which is an installation in where these conversations are being had all the time. Whatever the museum's open again. Anyway, but I think with this, I mean, we try not to make the type too small, but I do think we were just trying to push. I mean, we're just trying to push it and see to go as far as we could. And then I also feel like with color, because we weren't using charts in a traditional sense, there was no, data wasn't communicated through color. Actually, because using the ink on a one-to-one scale to communicate data was a bit of a challenge. And actually, I suppose, all of the type is actually black or printed out of black because it all needed to be ready for translation. So theoretically, you could go back to the same printer and they could just change the black plate. Right. So, I mean, there may not have been the traditional chart hurdles, but I guess, the point of a dot on the page, I still think that even if it's difficult to see, which it is, it is there, even with a magnifying glass.
And also that can help to reinforce the point you're making. You can't see this. Even with good vision, you can't see this. So the metaphor stands, at least on that front. And you spoke there about all the different visual methods that you used, where the visual method is the portrayal. And it isn't a bunch of traditional chart types. It's very unique ways of using and deploying words and letters and symbols. shapes, lines, and as you said, the other sensory perceptions of sound and kind of just physical kind of physical interaction with the piece. On one level, were you ever tempted to sneak in one or two traditional charts along the way? And secondly, did you ever have a concern that the method you were using could be a little too abstract for people to quickly grasp, albeit they would eventually grasp? Were there any concerns you had about the kind of literacy that people would have to even experience it? I'll come to you for this, Miriam.
Yeah, so, sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Just, did you consider ever using traditional charts along the way?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I was probably more tempted than Steph was in this respect, in that I would often find data stories that I thought were fascinating that I really wanted to get in there somehow, but there wasn't really any way of doing it within the physical constraints of the book. There was one about, there's 12,000 grass species in the world. I thought that was incredible, because we think of grass as one thing, but actually it's 12,000 different things. Well, is there any way we can do this if 12,000 small strokes on a page? And Steph just said, no, that's too much like an infographic, like we can't do that. So yeah, she was kind of the gatekeeper of the concept in that respect. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
No, it's just
I've got a really bad memory today.
The methods that you did use, were you ever concerned that maybe this would be too abstract at different points, or it would be that you'd need to go through too much explanation of the concept that it would also almost like ruin the rhythm of the experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That was a challenge that we were very aware of while we were writing it. And I think there were a couple of spreads in which we bump up against that limit. There's the one where you have to put the book on your head, actually, and it's intended to describe the difference in the gravity that you would feel if you were at sea level and put the book on your head. In the weight of your body at sea level versus the top of a mountain in the tropics.
Right.
Because the Earth is bulged, and obviously the higher you are in altitude, the further away you are from the Earth's center of gravity, you actually weigh less on the top of a mountain than you do at sea level. So I thought this was a pretty cool concept, but it is quite difficult to explain. And as you can see, I kind of fluffed that explanation. So you have to think about the wording very, very carefully to kind of keep as much clarity as possible. But in respect to that, we also had these very long endnotes. So we have, I think, 10 pages of endnotes at the back to clear up any, to really just clarify what is meant and to explain a little bit more background about each spread. So each spread really only has a few sentences on it. They can be quite cryptic. And this was a way that we could flesh out some of the research that's behind it.
Yeah.
And some of the assumptions that we'd made as well when we did calculations.
So Steph, you were the gatekeeper then for these these visual methods. What was your kind of rationale or your kind of protocol for judging?
I think it was probably, I think this was more in the beginning, because as we picked up pace, we were able to we just sort of knew everything fit.
Yeah.
But it was just and I mean, that's not to say that we don't. I mean, we have the height of sentences. That's a sentence is kind of like a bar chart, isn't it? I mean, technically, if you have words stacked on top of each other. But it was just that I think anything where a chart is a chart isn't of the election, with the US elections, for example, it's inherently abstracting the millions of people who voted for it to fit it onto the page. So that is a level of abstraction that we were trying to get away from with the one-to-one scale. So it was basically was it one-to-one, where we show was it actually embodying it, or was it not? And so that I mean, I wasn't really a gatekeeper. It's just that a lot of things weren't one-to-one.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think you're right. Absolutely, charts are abstractions of the phenomena on which we are reporting, and I suppose what you've managed to do is preserve the sense of the thing that you are referring to throughout the piece, even if, as you said, at times you could argue that is in its constructed a bar chart type methodology. The sequence of the book, why is the book in the order it is? What was the kind of thought process there? And I mean, I'm imagining a wall of post-it notes where you keep rearranging them in different sequences. What was the what was the kind of the arc that you were kind of going for in terms of topics or different methods? I'll come to you, Miriam, for this.
So yeah, because the book is really built up spread by spread, we did kind of create it in quite a piecemeal way. We were initially focusing purely on what we found interesting. And then only later did we start to string the spreads together into a kind of coherent narrative. But what we ended up with was really a kind of journey that's kind of a shift in tone as well. So at the beginning, the book introduces its own dimensions. It tells you I've got these superpowers, I've got words on the page, I've got colors, and I've got measurements, and this is what I'm going to use to show you the world. And then it kind of goes in with a spread which really is quite fortuitous in the light of what happened in 2020 that says touch this dot, and then there's a dot on the page which you touched. On the next spread it says you just transferred 100,000 bacteria or more knowing you. So yeah, the book kind of starts off quite, the book being very cheeky, it's kind of poking fun at you, it's trying to be a little bit irritating, it's trying to provoke and say, look how brilliant I am, look at what I can show you about the world. And then we go through some fairly childlike ideas about animals and the size of their tongues and their eyes and the rest of it, using the size of letters to communicate the breadth of a bumblebee's wings or the width of a moth's wings. And then there's a kind of series of spreads which are all about the time it takes to turn a page. So in the time it took to turn this page, was it 4 people were born and 2 people died? And there is a series of them to kind of break it up. And then there's a whole section of ideas to do with space and physics, and kind of almost like the book goes into space and floats around and tells you how much energy it could generate if it were floating around the Earth covered in solar panels. And then towards the end, it gets kind of more wistful. It sort of takes a step back and goes, well, I've told you everything I know. There's this wonderful world out there, but now it's up to you to go out and see it for yourself. And my work here is done. And then at the end, it kind of flies to the moon in this sort of magic realist way. It flies to the moon where it gathers a blanket of moon dust as thick as one of its own pages, which would apparently take 200 years if to gather 1.18 millimeters of moon dust based on measurements from various lunar missions.
That's really nice. Yeah, it's a really nice story. That I think as well, Steph, from your point of view, you were talking before about how you kind of come up with these different kind of ways of interacting with it. Does it need to be something where the thing that you're doing is in the similar batch of pages, so you don't kind of put something on your head and then you come back to do something similar 20 pages later? Did you want to sort of keep a fluidity in the type of ways you were interacting with the book at that point?
I mean, I don't think, I guess that's an interesting question. I don't think we were doing like a dance routine. We were going slam, hat, fall. But there were times like where, and this is really like kind of Miriam's realm, was kind of creating the links between these kind of disparate spreads where, if we're talking about breath, then we're like, okay, don't hold your breath, and now start to read. We do like recenter people after it, or recenter the reader after an interaction, and then like have them reset, and then pick up again. But I don't think there's too many that are, I guess like there aren't too many that are the same. And then I suppose another part of it that probably helps, it's less about the interaction and more just about the book design. Like, designing color books like this is really something where you are thinking a lot about the rhythm as you quickly turn pages. And so you're getting a visual rhythm and you're getting kind of a narrative rhythm. And so I think that like even just focusing on some of those will probably solve the problem, solve the problem of the interactions as well. If you see, like, if you focus on those, kind of will make sure all the other stuff falls into place as well.
And did you, go ahead, Miriam, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say on that, I mean, the rhythm was something that we thought about quite a lot, both in terms of the design and also the text, the placement of the text on the page and the time it takes to turn a page, not as a data carrying element, but more just in terms of how that affects your experience of reading the book. And there were a few spreads that are simply breathers. where the book takes a step back and goes into what we called portal space, which is all black background with white text on it and shapes floating around that are like the visual elements of the book. And in portal space, the book kind of ruminates and meditates on its own existence, makes a very general statement, and then goes back into the data again. So we wanted to create these little breathing spaces where people...
A little punctuation mark in the process.
Yeah, exactly.
And I suppose, you talked before about the kind of critical friends that you were surrounded by to help sort of develop the concept. Did you get useful testing feedback from people who went for the full book and said, actually, that kind of felt right there, that was too quick, or that felt a bit awkward? Did you go to that extent of testing the experience?
We had some useful comments on details of wording, or such and such a thing is unclear, but I think by that point the narrative was already quite fixed and we didn't get so many comments on things like tone and pacing, but we did get comments on the scientific content from the scientists that was really useful, particularly ways of nuancing terminology and describing things in a more accurate way. Yeah, there's one spread about evolution, and a friend of mine is a communicator of science and she works in communicating evolution, so she was exactly the right person to speak to about that.
To have, yeah.
Yeah, and she said, well, evolution isn't really a line through time, it's more of a tree. And I'm like, I know, but it's kind of a line in our spread, so we're just going to have to leave it like that.
Work with me, will you?
Yeah.
So just rattling through the few of the kind of design choices. The title of the book, how many iterations did you go through for that, and how did you end up with I am a book as the kind of the key premise? I come to you for this, Steph.
Well, this is a very easy answer. Is because for until the last month and a half before our hand-in a year ago, it was going to be the measuring book.
Okay.
and then our editor said, well, no, I think it wasn't just, no, there had been a conversation, I think maybe over the summer, where they were thinking about subtitles. And so they had the measuring book, and then we had to keep coming up with subtitles. And I guess they just weren't really working out for what they wanted. And I think so Miriam touched upon the fact that I come from a publishing background. So I used to work as a book and book cover designer. So I've marketing and editors. Well, you're probably used to this. It's all about selling the book, and they spend so much time trying to get that right. And so it just felt like there's a lot of conversation happening about it, and they keep asking us for more ideas. And then finally our editor just came up with this idea. And I actually think it was good that he did that, because I think it's a more active title, and it's quite a strange one. And that's the reason why our names are on the back of the book instead of the front. So it's so
it preserves that first person sensibility. I think it brings that charisma, that kind of personality that you talked about. The typeface choice, why did you end up with that particular typeface? I'm thinking this might be you, Steph. You feel...
Yeah.
I'm feeling there's a light just coming into your eyes there.
Is that all right, Miriam? Can I take this one?
Yeah, you can take this one.
Well, the typeface was... typeface is a very, very big deal. We worked with one typeface because that's the voice of the book. So we didn't want to work with multiples. We had thought about it, but it just didn't work out for the concept. But it's the typeface has actually been with the book through from the initial proposal to now, and it's Quixo Pro, and it's designed by a typographer called Frank Grieshammer. Grieshammer, thank you. But the reason that I went with it is because when we were originally coming up with both, Miriam's working on the tone and I'm thinking about the design and the design concept, and Miriam's thinking about research and just the writing tone. I was doing a lot of research of mid-century, mid-20th century picture books and really wonderful children's books, and sort of chose this kind of chunky slab serif typeface to reference those typefaces that you used to find in picture books of that time. I mean, if you want a very geeked out reason for the typeface. is it's because he said he drew it. I think it's like with like a nibbed pen, or it was yeah, the sketches for this typeface were kind of drawn with pen and ink and just for a very specific handmade approach, which I think made it feel a little bit warmer on the page than some of the
Yeah.
colder slab serifs. So I think really this is just to say, data people, type really matters. That's just my, you know.
It does, and I find it ever so hard to navigate through the choices, or the options, shall we say. But I think the idea that there's sometimes just a kind of textural quality to a typeface or one of its fonts that just feels like it's in keeping with as you said, the kind of personality of the book or the intent of the book and the messaging that's coming through it. Just regarding color very quickly, were you ever tempted to apply any constraints around maybe just using one or two spot colors alone, or some kind of monochromatic with the occasional color? Did you feel that it had to be a rich CMYK full hue spectrum color bonanza, or were you tempted to impose any constraints?
Is this a me question again?
I think it has to be you.
Sorry, I don't know. Just in case.
Well, I'm kind of now developing the sense that you're the gatekeeper of a lot of things in this project, Steph. So
only for the design side of
The
things.
design
Okay.
things,
Just
yeah.
the design side of things. Yeah. So yeah, Miriam was the spreadsheet, like the data gatekeeper. So she you know, everything there was hers. But I think originally we thought, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a spot color, to have a Pantone? I think we always knew it was going to be color. There are some beautiful books that are printed with like 4 Pantone inks as opposed to CMYK, but they're very, very expensive. And I think, so it was really a cost issue because it is expensive to print a 4-color book really, really well and in a really beautiful way, which Penguin did. And yeah, so it's always down to cost, as much as you'd love to throw a bunch of ink at it, in a perfect world. But I think we really kind of did. I think that's why the design uses all these gradients and kind of really bold colors to sort of celebrate. The book is such a meta book, and it celebrates itself, so celebrate its printing process as well.
And just kind of wrapping up with the discussion about the production side of things, what tools were you using in terms of sort of drafting this book and actually even the production of it? I mean, I'm assuming we're looking at the kind of Adobe suite. Would that be fair? And how did you sort of divide up the tasks as well? I'll come to you first, Steph.
Okay, yeah, then I can wrap up the design. I did all of I touched all the design files. So InDesign is, I guess, standard for book design, and then also a lot of illustrations in Adobe Illustrator. So that's all that I use. Even though later I think I had to take a lot of text out of Illustrator and redo it all in InDesign so it could be editable.
Yeah.
By people who want to do it in other languages. So yeah, it's mostly in InDesign now. So.
And for you, Miriam?
It was Google Sheets primarily for the research. That tends to be how I just throw everything in a Google Sheet, and then the copy was drafted in Google Docs, shared with Steph, and we had lots of comments on it, and it would get kind of thrown back and forth and refined. And then Steph would put it in a spread, and then we would both feedback on the initial design, and it went through several iterations that way. But there wasn't really any code involved. I think the only bit that involved code was the Python script that was written by Jonas Helson for the calculating how quickly the book would drop from 10 kilometers altitude. That was the most data-y bit.
And I suppose on that note, then, I'd be keen to find out your respective favourite bits of the book. I mean, for me, you touched on before the page where you do touch the book and the space where your fingerprint is, the amount of sort of germs you left behind. I think for me, the reason for that is it was the moment where, this is what the book's about. This is how you use it. Because one of the things that you touched on before about the kind of promotional materials is that you did leave this kind of enigmatic sense of, you weren't really telling people a lot, and that felt deliberate. We can't tell you too much about the secret of this book. And so when I did receive it, it was like, I'm still not sure what I'm getting here. And then sort of a couple of pages in, right, okay. That's when the penny dropped for me. So Miriam, I'll come to you first. What's your favorite spread?
Oh, well, just before I answer that, to explain why we were being so cryptic, and yes, it was a deliberate decision, is that partly to create, of course, intrigue, but partly because the book does not translate well into a digital form. So the book has to explain itself, if you like, rather than us explaining it like for the book. But my favorite spread, I do like the bacterial one. That's obviously seemed a lot more topical now than when we wrote it. I also like, there's a spread which is about relic neutrinos left over from the Big Bang, which are tiny subatomic particles that kind of pervade absolutely everything in the universe. They're pretty much uniformly distributed. And there's about 330, I think, per cubic centimeter.
Is this when it's all flying around the page?
Yes.
Yes.
So we have the Big Bang on the left-hand spread, and then we have the neutrinos on the right. And what I like about them is that they're incredibly difficult to detect. So they're I think they were only detected conclusively for the first time in like 2016. In order to detect them, you have to set up these big underground, essentially reservoirs that might pick up maybe one every so often. It's enormous resources required to just detect these tiny parts of the universe that are left over from the first moments after the Big Bang. So I find this fascinating that there's all this stuff out there that's real, that almost undetectable on the threshold of detection. And I like the fact that, again, thinking of the book as a portal, that the book is the way that you can become aware of these things that are out there, but also invisible and mysterious. So I like that.
It sort of serves purely to the subtitle of the book, I'm a portal to the universe in that case.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And for you, Steph?
I think that it's because it was one that was designed really early on, and then it just stayed. It was whenever you do a spread or you do part of a book, and it like just resolves itself very neatly, and then you don't really need to change it after that. Is that there's a double spread about that shows like the length of our DNA, but through this kind of story about traveling back in time to see, I guess, the shared ancestor that we have with a tree. Is that about right? I mean, it's here right in front of me. Our shared ancestor with the trees in the paper that make the book 1.8 billion years ago. And I like it just because it's this really nice integration of, it's just a really nice, it's got the integration between both how I work and Miriam works, so it's just, I just think it's just like a really well written small story that unfolds and then it just integrates so well with the design. And I just think it's a really good example of how this is the sort of thing where you wouldn't really be able to say one of us. It's just such a good example of that third persona,
Yes, that the embodiment of the whole project, probably. Working together, the topic, the premise, the whole purpose of the enterprise. And just to close off as well, what's the kind of, do you have any favorite anecdotes or little bits of feedback that you've seen from people who have had it, used it, friends, family, just random people? And I'll open this to either of you who can think of any examples.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, what's been really nice for me is just hearing kind of unprompted feedback from people. Particularly, even when the book wasn't fully written and it was just at the concept stage, a lot of people said to me, "Oh, that would be really great for my nephew," which is really gratifying. But kind of more officially, we just found out today that we were in the Financial Times Best Books of 2020 for the children and young adult audience. So that's very satisfying. Yeah, I'm really happy about that.
Especially as we approach the Christmas period.
Yeah.
And for you, Steph?
I think it's, some of the best feedback is feedback from people with children who are 8, 9, 10. A colleague of, just another data friend of ours said that her nephew can't stop slamming the book to hear how loud the sun is when, how loud the sun would sound if there was no vacuum of space. Is that right, Miriam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still a medium for the sound to travel through.
Yeah, and then just I got some other feedback from a woman who said that unprompted, her daughter just picked it up, started reading it, and brought it to school. She was really into it, and then brought it to school the next day to show her friends, and just felt like, this is for me. This is my sort of book. So I feel like I don't know about you, Miriam, but it does feel like it's really, our audience is probably younger than we ended up being younger than we thought, in a way.
Yeah.
I think, again, I think that speaks to some general themes of this whole subject area, which is we sometimes can underestimate our audiences. We can sometimes think they're not capable of making sense of the things that we think they're about to encounter. So I think the fact that youngsters have enjoyed it, parents have enjoyed it, parents and youngsters have enjoyed it together, I think it's, again, testament to a wonderful concept. And I mean, I'm not going to ask you about this because I don't want you to have to reveal any surprises or not, but I do envisage sequels. I can see other versions that might be very tightly thematic around different issues, environment, around equality. So I'm not going to ask you if that's on the horizon, but I'll take a note from your faces in response. But otherwise, Miriam, Steph, it's been wonderful to chat to you about that book. I'll make sure that all the key links are shared in the blog post. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for watching. This is the end of season 2 of Explore Explain. There may be a season 3, who knows? We'll leave that dangling as an end of season spoiler. See you all soon. Thank you. To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.